Today on In Good Faith, we're going to hear a really interesting combination of how faith works together with how our brains work, and maybe in particular, if your brain works a little bit differently than other people's do. And this is Reverend Dr. Katie Dunn. Katie, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Just about a month ago, before this interview, I was in Atlanta at Interfaith Atlanta, and I just walked up to your booth. We were chatting. I said, "What do you do?" And you were so fascinating. I said, "Promise me you will get in touch." Handed you my card, and you did, because this is such a great topic. And as a quick intro, Reverend Dr. Katie Dunn founded and leads an inclusive virtual community for those navigating faith and OCD called Stick with the Ick. I will ask about that title. She's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ and spent 7 years as the Academy Chaplain and Chair of Religious Studies at Woodward Academy in Atlanta. Also consulting on interfaith programming nationwide, which she still does. She's also the proud recipient of the Award for Distinction in Integrative Care Practices from Vanderbilt's Doctor of Ministry program, speaking to me from her office in Atlanta. You have a personal connection to this. I mean, you were already in ministry, but tell me a little about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, my story with OCD, I always say it begins really before I can even remember. Some of my earliest memories actually related to OCD. And I always like to take a step back and just start by defining what this is for folks. And I'll talk about what this looks like for me. But OCD is not the cute quirk that we often see in movies, and it's often misrepresented in media. It's really a challenging disorder that's marked by obsessions and compulsions. And obsessions are really intrusions that come up for someone around the things that are the most important to them. It's a series of what-if questions about the things that they care about most. And the compulsions are the things that they're doing to alleviate the fear, the guilt, the shame, the doubt around those what ifs. So from my earliest, go ahead.
No. Well, just what you just said. So it's not just that it's an irritating habit. It's that it seems to satisfy some need.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing, which we'll get into, the reason people engage in compulsions is typically the first time they do them, they go, okay, I feel safe from this intrusive thought or from this obsession. But it really doesn't work, because over time, the obsession comes back, or it comes back stronger, and they go back into what we call the OCD cycle or the OCD loop. And for so many people, it really does start early on. Some of my first memories were touching things in a particular order to try to keep everyone in the world safe, which seems incredibly extreme, but often OCD fears are not necessarily logical, but for the person, they seem real and intense. And I had an elementary school teacher tell me that the sun would eventually get too close to the earth and everyone would die. And I somehow associated, if I did everything right, I could keep everyone on the planet safe. And that was a lot of pressure for an elementary schooler.
Well, let me just say, we appreciate your efforts in our behalf.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But I moved through life where OCD was particularly challenging. My parents found treatment for me at one point that wasn't the effective treatment for OCD. And even at an early age, I think I was about 8 at that point, I actually pretended to get better because I wanted my psychologist to feel like he was good at his job. Also very much defined by my OCD. So I said, I feel better. I'm not having this issue anymore. And I continue to move through my life trying to keep everyone safe, trying to make everyone happy, and really masked a lot of the symptoms that I was experiencing. And the very lengthy story short is I got into seminary. And by the time I was moving through my Master of Divinity at Candler School of Theology, which is what brought me to Atlanta, my OCD was really bad. And it was to the point that I wasn't sleeping. I was driving back to churches and spaces in Atlanta to make sure candles were blown out and doors were locked to make sure everyone was safe. And I went to a mentor at the time and said, I think I actually have OCD because of a course I had taken that I recognized it. And at the time, I was told not to seek treatment because I wouldn't pass my ordination interviews or no one would respect me in ministry. So at the time, I actually didn't get help. I look back and I studied ways to get around OCD on my psych evaluations. And I just felt an extreme amount of shame for being neurodivergent in ministry and felt like, well, no one can know if I want to be a successful minister.
You said something that actually really touched me. You said that often the compulsions or the obsessions form around things that are very important to us. And one thing that's important, because you're in ministry, you care about people.
Yeah.
And so you did end up trying to save the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so as difficult as that was, I'm really sorry that you went through that. But I'm sort of touched that it centered around something that is so good, which is your care for people.
I appreciate that. And I think that becomes the really tricky thing with OCD is I've seen so many different cases where, which we'll get into a little bit more on the faith side today, where it latches on to, again, whatever's significant to someone. So it can be their love of people, their love of their child. It can be their love of God. And it takes something that's really pure and really beautiful and ultimately removes the person from the thing that they love so much, because the compulsions ultimately take someone away from actually engaging with their child or with God or with those around them, and can leave them confined to their room to keep everyone safe, when the actual way to engage with those you love would be to be with them. So it's really interesting that it's a disorder that claims to protect everything you care about while simultaneously taking you away from it.
Well, your organization is called Stick with the Ick. So tell me about that. It's very memorable.
Yeah. So, to give in terms of kind of how we got there, I ended up my first major role in educational chaplaincy. My OCD still wasn't treated at this point and got incredibly challenging. And I was the front line for grief, trauma, and loss for 2,700 amazing families from different faith backgrounds. And my OCD, as someone who cared so deeply, latched on to everything. And I started to blame myself for anything bad that happened in the community, for anything bad that happened in Atlanta. And I ultimately hit a really low point and ended up being able to seek treatment. And I feel very fortunate because I know that isn't the case for everyone. And I had the means and the resources and the support to seek exposure and response prevention, which is considered the gold standard treatment for OCD. And I got better. And for the first time, I actually felt connected to the things around me. I felt like I was able to be present and live my life. And I didn't want to be quiet about it anymore. So actually started sharing publicly as a school chaplain. And I was really scared that I actually would get fired or that no one would respect me as a minister. And it was the opposite. I started hearing from my students, "Oh, Chaplain K, can you talk to my rabbi or my priest or my imam or my pastor? And how can I talk with them about my mental health? How can I get treatment?" And this ultimately led me to a whole world of OCD advocacy in areas that I didn't know existed at the time, and into Scrupulosity that we'll get into a little bit today. But Stick with the Ick really comes out of that treatment that I advocate for and out of the treatment that saved my life. Because exposure response prevention is around this idea that we're engaging in things that are really hard in order to bring up those intrusions or obsessions. And then we're practicing not doing the compulsions. We're doing response prevention. And in order for that to be effective, we actually have to stick with the really icky stuff. We have to intentionally bring it on and let it be there and say, "Oh, I'm going to let all of the icky stuff be there, not going to get rid of it, not going to engage in compulsions in favor of stepping forward with my life, with my faith, and with my values." So I boil it down and say, we're going to stick with the ick.
And is that something to find on your website?
Yeah, so it's on my website, and actually stick with the ick. We have an app on Google Play and on the Apple App Store, which is a full-fledged community and has all kind of descriptions and things for folks of various faith backgrounds and ways to plug in and get involved and be connected as we stick with the ick together.
Nice. So stick with the ick. That's the app on your various platforms. The website is Rev Katie O'Dunn. So RevKatieOdunne.com.
And they can also stick with the ick.com. We'll go actually right to the app as well in the web space.
So much easier.
Yeah.
Well, let's tie this with faith a little bit, because a lot of folks, because if you perceive the world differently, I have often wondered and started lately asking people who are neurodiverse how they experience spirituality. Or are there barriers, or are there ways in which maybe you're more gifted at connecting spiritually? And I wonder, just as you've worked with different people as a chaplain on a different range of neurodiversities, what do you see as strengths or challenges in a faith life?
Yeah. So the primary space now, my full work is around OCD and scrupulosity, which is actually really entirely related to someone's faith or morality. And scrupulosity, we say, is kind of a facet of obsessive compulsive disorder, where all of the obsessions and compulsions actually relate to their faith. So all of those what if questions have to do with, well, what if I did something wrong? What if God's mad at me? What if I sinned? What if I'm not good enough? What if I didn't ritually wash enough times? What if I didn't follow that dietary restriction perfectly?
Yeah.
But it goes beyond normative practice in the community. And then the compulsions can often look like someone is incredibly devout, when the reality is they're doing those things over and over and over again in response to the obsession in a way that feeds the OCD. So it can look like someone praying 100 times a day, trying to get it just right, or washing again and again, or going and confessing to their minister or to God over and over. And the challenge for someone with scrupulosity, even though it can look like they're incredibly devout, is these practices, it actually moves them away from their faith. And I often say it's almost like they're worshiping OCD instead of the divine, because it's from a space of fear and guilt and shame and anxiety dictated by the disorder. They have this heightened sense of responsibility, like I did throughout my entire life, but towards God. They have a desire to get it right and to be certain in ways that aren't necessarily possible in our faith. And for them, this can move them further away as they're engaged in the disorder. Now, I think the flip side, which we can talk about through treatment, I actually see folks with OCD get closer to God in really amazing, awesome ways.
Well, I was going to ask if having those sorts of worries and even if they're unconsciously self-imposed barriers, keeps people from feeling something as simple as God cares about me or God loves me. With or without whatever else is going on.
Yeah, it's incredibly, incredibly sad. We have a support group this evening. I run a lot of different interfaith groups for folks who navigate, and our primary topic relates to people thinking that God loves everyone else except for them, that they are not worthy of God's love or God's forgiveness, and that they have to be perfect in order to be enough for God. And it's really sad because these are incredible people who can look at anyone else in the world and see, oh, this person is a wonderful child of God, but they have so much trouble looking in the mirror and seeing that for themselves. And at the simplest level, it just separates them from actually feeling the love of God that's there the entire time.
So as you started to heal or be able to learn how to direct or deal with those feelings, did you discover, even though you were in ministry, did you find new spiritual gifts?
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons that I started to kind of dive into and work in this area. In moving through treatment and in healing, I recognized there was so much grief from what I had experienced. And I felt like there were so many things in my life that were, I always say, kind of shattered on the floor. And also at the same time, through faith, I felt like those pieces were put back together in a way that was even more beautiful than it was to begin with. And life wasn't what it was before, but it was even better because of all of the things that I learned throughout this kind of wilderness recovery journey. And not to sugarcoat it, I know OCD is incredibly challenging. And I think that there are so many people in the community with OCD who are the most kind, creative, compassionate, wonderful humans. And in moving through treatment, I actually see people connect with God in ways that are authentic to them. I see them learn, because of the leaps of faith that they take in treatment, to fully surrender, to find beauty in brokenness, and to have just a really beautiful view of what it means to connect with the divine. And that's what happened with me. And so much, probably the greatest gift of doing this work is seeing that with individuals every day that are so scared. I often hear, if I get treatment and I'm not doing these compulsions, what if that means that I'm no longer going to connect with God? And it's actually the opposite. I see people connect with God as they move through and heal in just really profound ways.
Oh, I love hearing that. You mentioned connecting with faith, with God, or even just any moral system. So this seems to be a common a variation in humanity. So does it manifest differently if you're Christian or Muslim or Hindu or raised with no particular faith? Or is it just there in a certain percentage of every population?
That is such a great question. We are actually starting a research study on this right now because there isn't enough research on this. But the cause of OCD is still unknown. There is some debate in this area, but it's often believed that individuals are predisposed to have OCD, that there's something genetic. And then it's also exacerbated by your environment. And as a result, I think I typically say that I think folks are probably prone to have OCD. It would have shown up in some way or another. But because they grew up in a particular faith tradition, it just happens to manifest in that way. And I don't see it coming up more often in the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition or the Hindu tradition or the Muslim tradition. It just shows up differently. I work on cases around the world across faith traditions that people are in profound pain from this disorder, whether it is about ritually washing on Fridays or eating the appropriate meal or praying and reading scripture in the correct way. It just manifests differently based on the environment that they're a part of and what's really important to them.
I am so impressed with what you do, but here's another impressive thing I read that you have tackled over 50 ultra marathons.
So I'm on the journey. I haven't done all of them yet. I'm on the goal to completing 50 in 50 states.
Okay. And some would say this is, yes, confirmation of OCD. But what number are you on?
So no, I'm only am I 7 or 8 in? I just started like a year and a half ago.
Wow. And this is like at least a 50 miler. Is that how they define those?
These, I'm doing anything 50K and up. Mm-hmm. And the goal is before I'm 50 and I'm 34. So I just need to do a couple of years. We can get there. But the entire kind of purpose around that is, I'm a runner to begin with. I grew up as a runner. I was a Division I runner and have been a competitive athlete for a long time. But the other phrase in the community that I use besides stick with the ick is running towards your values. And I always say that no matter how you're feeling or the thoughts that you're having, we have this really beautiful choice in faith to continue moving toward everything that's meaningful to us. And I always say for me that I don't just move in that direction. I try to run and leap in that direction. And the races are kind of a physical manifestation of that. And the 50 in 50 states comes from the idea that there are so many individuals, unfortunately, who don't have access to evidence-based care because of financial barriers. So for each race, I do a fundraiser in that particular state to raise funds for scholarships for folks seeking evidence-based treatment in that state and to raise awareness.
Okay, well, that gives a whole new meaning to running an organization or running a particular work. Do you have a sense that there was a plan, that you're called to this by your circumstances or whatever God had in mind?
Yeah, very much so. And I think for me, there's a lot of purpose in looking back at really painful moments, in knowing that, I think I always say I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the whys, and that's okay. But I do believe that God has been with me every step of the way and has given me an amazing, beautiful opportunity to find beauty in brokenness. And I have so much gratitude for that. I look back, and as recent as 2017 or 2018, I didn't know how I was going to get out of bed or step forward. And to be in a space now where I love my life and I have the incredible blessing of getting to work with so many amazing folks across faith traditions who struggle with exactly what I did and help them find faith in the midst of that, is just the biggest gift. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I'm so thankful every day to God for that. I really am.
How do you perceive, different for everybody, I suppose, but how do you perceive direction or a nudge or an answer, a direct answer to a prayer or a longing? How does that come to you? How do you recognize that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I actually probably think about this pretty often because I get this question from folks with OCD of how do I know that I'm not supposed to do this thing as a sign for God or from God, or that I am supposed to do this thing, which actually can be in the form of an obsession. And I often, in separating the voice of God from the voice of OCD, see that things from an OCD space often move with urgency and move quickly and move with fear. And it feels like I have to get this thing right now, or something bad's going to happen. And God answering or nudging us moves from a space of meaning and connection and hope and the hold of a hand and a hug. And that's really what I have felt on the sides of my journey that have been directed by faith in God and not by OCD. This really slow, comfortable, beautiful movement toward everything that was meaningful to me that I couldn't have expected. And I think about if I had moved through a lot of these things with urgency, or said, oh, I have to get this right, and I have to make meaning out of this right now, and I have to create this, that isn't the way that God moves with us. And I think following where we find meaning and hope and community and that calm breath is really how I try to move in following God.
One quick observation, then a question is, it's probably not really helpful if, we joke if we stop to just straighten things and then people see us and people joke and say, oh, sorry, it's just my OCD, because that's not what it is. And I think that it seems like it would not be helpful that we joke that way.
So it's ironic that we're doing this interview right now. It's actually OCD Awareness Week. So we are in the full throes of so many things around OCD awareness. And this is one of the biggest things that we talk about, that when we see something portrayed in the media in that way, or when someone says, oh, I just like to organize my pens, or I like to do this, that it might seem like such a small thing, but it does a couple of things. It minimizes the disorder. It prevents individuals from getting diagnosed and treated because they don't often recognize really what it is. And it really perpetuates a stereotype of something that the disorder's not. And I think it can seem like such a harmless thing. And what someone is describing when they say, I like organizing this or I like doing that, is the opposite, actually, of the disorder. OCD is what's called ego dystonic. And it means that all of your obsessions take something that you love and twist it. So the obsessions actually go against what you care about. So your compulsions are never going to be about something that you like or that you enjoy. It's actually something that's painful for someone. So I used to find it so painful when I would be at work and someone would say, oh, I love straightening my car. I have OCD too. And I would think, I just spent 8 hours doing this thing that was so painful for me that I didn't want to do. It's not something that I like.
Yeah, well, what a great point. So what can we do in faith communities, like whether in small groups or in our congregations of a Sunday or a Friday at Shabbat service or whatever? What can we do to be more aware and maybe more helpful to people who have OCD or scrupulosity in particular?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think there are so many amazing ways that faith communities can help, because faith leaders in particular actually are often the first person that someone with scrupulosity goes to. Because they'll say, I have all of these questions, or I want to confess this thing to you. So I think the more education that we can do both in congregations and with faith leaders, the better. That's part of with Stick with the Ick. We just came out with a new course for clergy that lets clergy know how can we recognize OCD in our various faith communities, but then also how can we offer support without offering reassurance. And I think this is a key point for folks in their communities to know. If someone has OCD or you suspect they have OCD or they're moving through treatment, reassurance is actually never helpful. If they're continuing to ask the same question over and over and you're saying, oh, it's going to be okay and God loves you and it's completely fine. I know that's what we want to do as congregants or as ministers. But unfortunately, that actually serves as a compulsion and it puts the person back in the cycle and it makes the obsession stronger. So I always say an alternative in a faith community, if someone is asking the same question again and again from a space of OCD, is to say, I think you have asked this question before, and I think you're asking from a space of anxiety. I know that this is not going to be helpful to you on your treatment journey right now, but I am more than happy to sit with you in the midst of the uncertainty and the discomfort and these tough emotions because I really care about you and want you to get better.
Well, thank you. That's really practical, what we can do. Thanks very much. I wonder if you have, what don't I know to ask you that you're thinking, gosh, I wish everybody knew this thing about scrupulosity? Do people sometimes have a hard time recognizing it in themselves?
Oh, absolutely. So actually, OCD as a whole, on average, it takes someone 17 years to get diagnosed with OCD.
Wow.
And that's one of the reasons that kind of these stigmatizing phrases that we hear aren't helpful because folks don't know what it really is. But in working in scrupulosity, it's been fascinating to me training clergy and going to different spaces where typically as soon as I do a training, someone will say, wow, there are 4 folks in my congregation who have been doing all of these things and I had no idea. And I feel so bad because I've been giving them reassurance for 5 years and we didn't know. And it's interesting because it's something we don't learn necessarily as clergy in seminary. And yet faith leaders can play such a significant role in recognizing and helping someone seek support, but also seek the correct evidence-based treatment like exposure and response prevention. I guess the piece that I always like to highlight is scrupulosity. It's not a faith concern. It's not a lack of faith. It's not that someone is not doing the right things or not praying hard enough. It's a mental health disorder that's latching on to something really, really important to you. And there is so much help and hope in the midst of that. And also by engaging in treatment, it doesn't mean that you're moving away from faith. You're actually taking a leap of faith. My doctoral work was around reimagining exposure and response prevention as a spiritual practice and looking at the way folks of various religious and spiritual traditions reconnected with God.
And so also people should know that it's not something they should regard as a sin or a punishment as well,
No,
that kind of thing.
no.
Wow. Well, I would love someone with your experience and expertise in every theological seminary training people.
Thank you.
But it seems like that's something that if someone wants more information or might tell their spiritual leader, they could simply go to stickwiththeick.com for
Yeah.
Scrupulosity, or there are other ways to get ongoing training.
Yeah, so there are a lot of options. You can reach out to me directly on my website. I do a lot of in-person and virtual trainings for
Mm.
clinicians and for faith communities. And then, yes, all of the new Stick with the Ick now has courses for clinicians who are seeking to learn about all different faith traditions to offer culturally responsive treatment, for clergy to offer support without reassurance. And then also for folks who might think they have OCD or scrupulosity to get support across faith traditions. But if there are things that are not there, that's one of my favorite things is going into faith communities and working with folks and training and helping create resources that are helpful for you.
Mm. Well, thank you. This is so enlightening. And there are a few things I'd heard a little bit about, but several things that were just completely news to me. So thank you so much for helping us out with expanding our knowledge. Sometimes when people go through something difficult or something happens, like, I'm talking about very difficult things, like you might lose a limb or you have a chronic ongoing condition like this. People could say, I just don't think God would do these kinds of things to people. So I'm pretty sure maybe this whole thing about God is just not a thing. And I'm wondering if you can put your finger on why you believe.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question. So, there have been so many moments throughout my life, and I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and that was always a cornerstone of my life. But going actually in college, I was there primarily to run cross country, and that was what I cared about as I headed in. That was kind of everything. And my first week there broke my foot. And I ended up coming back and, having a wonderful couple last seasons, but it led to a really beautiful experience where I got to work with a group of foster kids in the area who were running cross country. And I remember feeling God's movement the way that I explained a little bit earlier, and just this hug and this breath, and moving toward that experience in the midst of something really hard. And pieces started to come together for me where I was asked to preach at a church for the first time. And I remember standing up there and feeling again this deep breath of God is here, and this is where I'm supposed to be. And I think those moments for me throughout my life, and in every hard instance, I had a series of really difficult losses while working in school chaplaincy of individuals to their own mental health struggles that were incredibly challenging for me. And at every turn where I wondered, where is God? Or where I wanted to cry out like the psalmist and lament, I would find God in the faces of my incredibly devout and faithful students, whether they were Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Sikh, that would come and pray with me, or that would light up as they talked about their spiritual practices. And I just think again and again in the toughest moments, I found that it isn't about, God has done this thing to me or allowed this thing. I see God really as walking with and weeping alongside us and giving us the strength to keep moving forward and to find beauty in that if we allow it to exist.
Thank you so much. Reverend Dr. Katie Dunn leads an inclusive virtual community for those navigating faith and OCD, particularly scrupulosity. So what a great person to reach out to. Stickwiththeick.com is the easiest, or look up revkatieodunn.com if you'd like to do that. This is really a gift of knowledge and your personal compassion that you've shared with us. So thanks so much for speaking with me today in good faith.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I love this work so much. I wake up every day and just love getting to do this work with folks. And it's an honor to share about it. So thank you for having me, and would love to continue to connect.